There are books that educate, books that entertain, and books that inspire. But then there is the Quran, a book that doesn't just speak to the mind, but to the very soul. It doesn't wait for you to be perfect or religious to open it. It waits patiently, quietly, knowing that one day you'll need its words, and when that moment comes, it speaks. Not with noise, not with pressure, but with a kind of calm authority that shakes the heart and heals it at the same time. You could be sitting alone, burdened by a sadness you can't even explain, and a single verse will feel like someone just turned on a light inside you. You could be searching for meaning in the chaos of life, and the Quran will softly guide you, reminding you that you were never lost. You just hadn't looked in the right place yet. What makes it even more powerful is that you don't always understand how it speaks so clearly to your condition. You read a verse, and suddenly the tears come. You hear someone recite a passage in prayer, and your heart starts racing. You're not sure if it's guilt, hope, peace, or love, but you know it's real. The Quran doesn't argue or debate with you. It doesn't need to. It reveals, it reminds, and it awakens. Sometimes, even people who don't understand Arabic find themselves moved by its rhythm, its presence, its depth. It has a way of bypassing language and going straight to the place where the soul listens. What's even more stunning is the timing. You open it after a fight, and it speaks about patience. You scroll past a verse after losing someone, and it reminds you about the promise of reunion and eternal peace. You begin to worry about your future, and suddenly you read about trusting the one who controls all futures. These are not coincidences. They are moments of divine communication, carefully placed like answers wrapped in mercy. The Quran speaks because it was designed to reach hearts that are searching, breaking, questioning, or just tired of pretending. And when it touches your heart, you change. You start to crave that connection again. You start to realize that the peace you were chasing in people, money, entertainment, or self-help books was always waiting in the words of your Creator. You may find yourself crying during verses about forgiveness because suddenly you believe that even with all your flaws, Allah still wants you. You may pause at verses about justice, realizing you don't need revenge, just trust. Or you may feel overwhelmed with love when you read how Allah responds even to the whispers of the heart. This book, which many ignore or misunderstand, becomes your secret lifeline. What's beautiful is that the Quran is not just for the scholar or the saint. It's for the mother sitting quietly after a long day, the student overwhelmed by pressure, the worker stuck in a cycle, the heartbroken soul looking for healing. It is for anyone and everyone. The Quran meets you where you are, but it never leaves you there. It gently lifts you to a better place, one verse at a time. And once you taste that feeling of being seen, understood, and guided, you keep coming back. Because nothing in the world compares to hearing your own heart say, "The Quran is speaking to me again." He didn't open the Quran expecting anything. It was just one of those restless nights, the kind where sleep feels distant and your heart feels heavy for reasons you can't explain. His phone was beside him, filled with distractions, but instead of scrolling through social media, something inside urged him to open a Quran app he had downloaded long ago but never used. He clicked it, chose a random surah, and began to read. The words appeared ordinary at first, beautiful, yes, but distant. And then suddenly, a verse felt like it was reaching through the screen, pulling something out of his chest. It was describing his exact situation, his silent questions, his hidden fears. It felt like someone had read his thoughts and responded, not with judgment, but with mercy. He paused. How could this book, revealed over 1,400 years ago, know what he was going through today? That moment stayed with him. The next day, he opened it again, this time with a little more curiosity, a little more sincerity. And again, the verses felt personal. They didn't just talk about God, they introduced him to the one who listens to every whisper of the heart, the one who doesn't need perfect words to understand pain. He read about people who had lost hope and found it again, about prophets who were patient in hardship, about forgiveness that reaches even those who feel too far gone. And for the first time in a long time, he felt seen. The Quran wasn't like other books. It didn't speak to the surface. It spoke to the soul. Days turned into weeks. Reading the Quran became a habit, then a comfort, then a need. Each verse revealed a new layer, not just about faith, but about himself. It taught him to slow down, to reflect, to be grateful. It taught him how to breathe through stress, how to respond to hate with peace, how to look at pain not as punishment but as purification. And slowly, he began to change. He found himself speaking more gently, thinking more deeply, praying not out of obligation but out of longing. The world around him hadn't changed, but his heart had. All because of a book he once ignored, and now couldn't imagine living without. The Quran wasn't just speaking to him, it was healing him. He wasn't looking for guidance, at least not intentionally. Life was loud, busy, and constantly pulling him in every direction. Between work, social obligations, and trying to keep up with the endless expectations of modern life, the last thing on his mind was sitting quietly with the Quran. He believed in God, yes, but religion had become something cultural, something for Fridays or funerals. Then one day, during a random visit to his cousin's house, he saw a small Quran resting neatly on a shelf. His cousin was praying, and while waiting, he picked up the book out of simple boredom. He opened to a random page and started reading the translation. The verse spoke about anxiety, about hearts finding peace in the remembrance of Allah. It felt like the verse had been waiting for him, not as a coincidence, but as an invitation. That night, he couldn't shake the feeling. He kept thinking about how the verse knew exactly what he'd been feeling. No therapist, no friend, no podcast had ever managed to put into words what that single verse had said. The next morning, he downloaded a Quran app and began reading one verse a day, just one. But each one pulled him in deeper. They weren't just poetic or wise, they were alive. They addressed doubts he hadn't even said out loud. They brought calm in moments of chaos. They reminded him of purpose when everything felt meaningless. Slowly, it became a ritual. He'd read before bed or right after waking up. Sometimes on the subway, sometimes in the quiet corner of a cafe. And every time, it felt like the Quran knew. If he was worried about money, it spoke of provision. If he felt overwhelmed, it reminded him of patience. If he was angry, it soothed him with the Prophet's "peace be upon him" mercy. It wasn't always instant. Some verses sat in his heart quietly until the right moment came, but they always returned like echoes of divine care. Over time, his heart softened. He smiled more. He became less reactive. He started praying again, not out of pressure, but out of connection. What changed him wasn't a lecture or a debate. It was the consistent, gentle voice of the Quran. Always relevant, always personal, always filled with love. He had read many books, philosophy, self-help, biographies of great minds. He had attended seminars, listened to podcasts, and even practiced meditation, hoping to find clarity and calm in a world that constantly pushed him toward noise. But nothing seemed to settle the storm within. Until one day, in a quiet moment of reflection, he opened the Quran. It wasn't something he planned to do. In fact, he had avoided it for years, thinking it was only for scholars or elders. But something inside whispered to just try. Just read one page. And so he did. The first verses he read weren't just poetic. They were piercing. They spoke of life, death, purpose, and the human heart in a way he'd never heard before. It wasn't just a text, it was a mirror, and it showed him things he had been too distracted to see. That night, he couldn't sleep. Not because he was afraid, but because something had awakened in him. The words of the Quran were not distant, they were intimate. They addressed his fears, reminded him of his worth, and called him towards something greater than success or status. He had always thought religion was about rules, but here was a book that spoke directly to the soul, offering comfort, direction, and healing. The next day he read more. Verses about the mercy of Allah brought tears to his eyes. Stories of prophets gave him hope that even the most righteous struggled, were tested, and still found peace through faith. The Quran didn't ask him to be perfect. It invited him to be sincere. Each day he read, his heart felt lighter. He began noticing things. How quick he was to judge others. How often he ignored the blessings in his life. How deeply he needed forgiveness, not from people, but from the one who made him. Slowly his actions changed. He was kinder to his family, more patient in stressful moments, and more grateful for small things. He began praying, not mechanically, but meaningfully. Each sujood became a release. Each verse he recited in prayer was a conversation. What once seemed foreign had become home. He often wondered, how could this book, centuries old, speak so clearly to someone like him in a world like this? But that was the miracle. The Quran didn't just speak to minds, it spoke to hearts. And once it reached his heart, he knew he could never turn away. He once thought the Quran was only for the overly religious. People who dressed a certain way, spoke in Arabic, or lived by rules he didn't understand. But then life started to hit him in waves. Anxiety crept in, the pressure to succeed, to appear strong, to be enough. It all became too much. One night, while scrolling on his phone, he saw a short video of someone reciting a verse from the Quran. The voice was soothing, and though he didn't understand the Arabic, the translation hit him hard. It said, "Indeed, with hardship comes ease." He paused. He'd heard similar lines in books, but this felt deeper. It wasn't motivational fluff. It felt like a promise, a divine one. That short clip led him to explore more verses. He downloaded a Quran app and started reading translations late at night, often after everyone had gone to sleep. At first, it was curiosity, but the more he read, the more he felt something shift. The Quran didn't just talk about ancient people and distant lands. It talked about him, his pain, his confusion, his hopes, his guilt. It acknowledged every emotion he had tucked away. It didn't deny the reality of struggle, but it constantly reminded him of mercy, patience, and hope. One day he read a verse that said, "Allah does not burden a soul beyond what it can bear." It stopped him in his tracks. He had felt so overwhelmed lately, like he was drowning. But here was this line telling him he was stronger than he believed, and that his Creator knew his limits better than he did. Slowly, his heart softened. He began waking up early, craving the quiet moments before the world woke up, just to read a few lines. The Quran became his companion, his lifeline. It didn't judge him, it invited him. What surprised him most was how practical the guidance was. The Quran didn't just speak about spirituality. It spoke about relationships, anger, justice, forgiveness, and humility. It was a complete guide, not just for rituals, but for life. And every time he thought he had read enough, he found something new, something that spoke directly to his current situation. That was the beauty. The Quran kept meeting him where he was and lifting him gently to where he needed to be. He had always assumed that the Quran was a book of rules, complex, strict, and meant only for scholars or the deeply religious. But one day, out of sheer curiosity and emotional exhaustion, he picked it up. His life was spiraling. On the outside, everything looked fine, but inside he was restless, anxious, and deeply unsure of where he was going. He had tried therapy, books, podcasts. Nothing gave lasting peace, but as he opened the Quran and began reading, something unexpected happened. It didn't feel like he was reading, it felt like he was being read. His soul, with all its confusion and longing, was being understood without him even needing to explain. He stumbled upon a verse that said, "He is with you wherever you are." Those words lingered in his mind long after he closed the book. He had never heard something so personal, so comforting. The Quran wasn't distant. It didn't preach from afar. It came close, as if sitting beside him in his struggle, whispering reminders that he wasn't alone. And that changed everything. He began to read more consistently, not out of duty, but because it felt like the only thing that truly knew him. The Quran spoke of forgiveness in a way no one ever had. It said that even if a person sins repeatedly, Allah's mercy is greater. It taught him that his past didn't define him, and that redemption wasn't only for the pious. It was for anyone who sincerely turned back. That idea gave him hope. For the first time, he felt like he wasn't too far gone. Every verse he read chipped away at the shame and self-doubt he had carried for years. He started noticing how the Quran addressed the heart more than anything else. It reminded him to reflect, to be grateful, to let go of arrogance, to be gentle with others, and to return to prayer not because God needs it, but because he needed it. With time, the peace he'd been chasing finally began to settle in his life. Not all at once, but steadily. The more he read, the more his heart healed. And it wasn't through force or pressure. It was through love, clarity, and the quiet but powerful voice of the Quran that never stopped speaking to him exactly when and how he needed it most. He didn't expect the Quran to answer the questions he hadn't even asked out loud, but it did, again and again. He had grown up in a fast-pacing world, constantly told to chase dreams, money, and success. Yet in the quiet moments, late at night or while driving alone, he often felt an emptiness he couldn't explain. One day, while scrolling online, he came across a Quran verse that said, "Verily, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest." The words felt like they were speaking directly to his ache. Could it really be that simple? That verse sparked a journey. He started reading more, not all at once, but a few lines each day. And what amazed him was how relevant and alive the Quran felt. It didn't feel like a book from centuries ago. It felt like a living message. It didn't ignore reality. It acknowledged pain, fear, heartbreak, and loss. But it always ended in hope. It spoke of storms, but also reminded that, indeed, with hardship comes ease. That promise, repeated twice in the same chapter, began to change the way he saw his struggles. As he continued reading, he found guidance that touched every part of life. When he felt anger rising, the Quran reminded him that the strong one is not the one who defeats others, but the one who controls himself when angry. When he felt guilt from past mistakes, he read about God's mercy being wider than all creation. When he feared judgment or failure, the Quran taught him to rely on intention and trust in Allah's plan. It wasn't just spiritual, it was deeply human. What stood out most was how the Quran kept showing up with the right words at the right time. If he was feeling weak, it reminded him of the strength of Prophet Moses. If he felt alone, it reminded him that even Prophet Jonah, cried out from the depths. The Quran didn't just give him stories, it gave him mirrors. He saw himself in those verses, and through them he found clarity, patience, and peace. Now, every time he opens the Quran, it feels like it knows exactly where he is and what he needs. The words settle in his heart like medicine, and slowly, day by day, they are rewriting his life, not just with information, but with transformation. Sometimes all it takes is one verse to change everything. The Quran doesn't just speak to the mind, it speaks directly to the heart, to the pain we hide and the questions we don't say out loud. For those who truly listen, it becomes more than a book. It becomes a companion, a guide, and a source of light in the darkest moments. It reminds us that we are never alone, never too broken, and never too far from mercy. And for the one who opens it, sincerely, it always responds. Thank you for watching this heartfelt journey. If the Quran has ever touched your heart, even for a moment, share this video so someone else can feel that same light. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring content. Until next time, may peace fill your heart and may guidance find your soul.